Most of you have probably seen or heard that e-cigarette maker Juul just settled a lawsuit with the state of North Carolina for $40 million. North Carolina filed their suit in May of 2019, and as of the making of this video, there are currently 14 other attorneys general suing Juul, as well as thousands of lawsuits across the country with plaintiffs ranging from individuals to cities and counties to school districts to Native American tribes. There are so many lawsuits, it's hard to keep track, so the courts consolidated many of them into an MDL docket, or multi-district litigation, under one judge in San Francisco. The majority of the cases are filed by individuals, but the second largest group of plaintiffs comes from school districts. The MDL lists 155 school districts from states all over the country. Interestingly, some of these schools don't even track how many of the students vape, if they use Juuls, or what damages they should claim.
It is a complicated formula, so it's my understanding from the law firms that they, with respect to Juul, because they are the largest manufacturer of e-cigarettes, they represent a certain percentage, I'm just guessing, say 80% of the manufacturing of e-cigarettes. And so our damages allegedly would be calculated based on 80% of our infractions. It's hard to also track internally because, like you said, we don't have a system first of all, we don't track between traditional tobacco products and e-cigarettes. And not only that, but we also don't calculate to the manufacturer of each of the cigarettes, of the e-cigarettes. So yes, that's part of the formula.
Yet they've been persuaded to sue Juul by powerful litigation attorneys who stand to make lots of money in cases like these. Of the 155 school districts, over 90% of the schools are represented by just 6 attorneys. By all accounts, it appears that everyone sees suing Juul as easy money, including anti-vaping advocates. In a recent panel from the Public Health Law Center, tobacco control activists reflected on the master settlement agreement reached in 1998 and how that could be relevant today.
I guess it's my hope that there is a future settlement agreement with the e-cigarette industry as a whole, if not just specific companies.
If you're wondering how this relates to the Juul lawsuits, let's back up for a moment. Beginning in the 1950s, there were decades of unsuccessful lawsuits against tobacco companies. In the 1990s, states' attorneys general tried a new tactic and began suing tobacco companies to recover Medicaid and other health-related costs, which proved successful. After individually settling with 4 states, the tobacco companies eventually agreed to one large settlement that would cover the remaining 46 states, known as the Master Settlement Agreement, or MSA. The MSA is still the single largest civil litigation settlement in U.S. history because it requires the participating tobacco companies to pay the states a portion of their revenue every year, forever. As of 2020, tobacco companies have already paid over $160 billion. These mandatory MSA payments resulted in an increase in cigarette prices, and through the MSA, tobacco companies agreed to marketing and advertising restrictions, releasing millions of internal documents, and providing initial funding for what is now the Truth Initiative, one of the largest and most active anti-tobacco organizations in the country. The year after the MSA was signed, the federal government sued the tobacco companies under a civil RICO statute. RICO stands for Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations and was an act passed in the U.S. which allowed for more severe criminal and civil penalties for crimes committed as part of an ongoing criminal enterprise. The government ultimately won this case, which required the tobacco companies to, among other things, issue corrective statements about the health effects of smoking. The MSA money tobacco companies pay is supposed to be used to combat smoking and offset increased health costs, but as many tobacco control activists will tell you, it's largely not. States typically use the money for their general fund on things like shipping docks, golf courses, and jails. Tobacco control activists spend a significant portion of their time lobbying state governments to give the money to them, but they're not as successful as they'd like. Since the advent of vaping, these activists have been suggesting that vapor companies should also be forced into a similar type of settlement, perhaps an MSA 2.0, likely due to the dwindling funds available to them as smoking continues to decline in the United States. If they could require vapor companies to pay and funnel some or all of that money to themselves, they'd have a secure funding stream for their organizations and jobs.
I would advocate for an approach like the MSA. Yeah, as I said before, we have been able to take on e-cigarettes. We're lucky, but the way the MSA is constructed, the main money coming from it is gone, and money isn't coming from the e-cigarette flow. So we'll be able to do it for a little while, but without new funds, that's work that's going to be difficult to continue.
The avalanche of lawsuits drowning Juul, coupled with the recent ruling by the San Francisco judge that plaintiffs can move forward with civil RICO allegations, is starting to look very familiar. The RICO claims will make a settlement much more likely, since if Juul loses, the amount of money they pay in damages is tripled, per the RICO statute. Like with the MSA, tobacco control activists know that the best possible outcome for them involves not just Juul settling, but other vape manufacturers as well.
Some of the elements, if you could come up with sufficient incentives to get new players in the market to become participating manufacturers, which has been one of the barriers in the cigarette market. The functions of the MSA would be really good to apply to e-cigarettes.
Why would other vape companies sign on to a settlement when they weren't being sued? To answer that question, let's look back at the original MSA. The MSA was an agreement between 46 U.S. states and initially only 4 tobacco companies. These companies had to raise the price of their cigarettes to compensate for the loss of money, and they argued that this would give their competitors an unfair advantage in the market. So the MSA was written with a clause that allowed tobacco companies to give the states less money if they lost market share to cheaper competitors. This created a strong incentive for the states to help make sure that didn't happen, so they were encouraged to pass legislation requiring any tobacco company who wanted to sell in their state to either join the MSA or make payments to the states, resulting in higher cigarette prices, effectively leveling the playing field. As further incentive to join, these subsequent tobacco companies only had to pay the states if their market share increased beyond a preset level. 41 additional tobacco companies have since signed on to the MSA. Encouraging or extorting additional tobacco companies into joining the MSA was a win-win for both sides. The original 4 tobacco companies wouldn't have an unfair disadvantage in the marketplace, and the states would receive the highest payments possible and be able to restrict the activities of as many tobacco companies as possible.
There's so much litigation against Juul right now from individuals, from states, from tribes, and so it certainly seems like it's creating a situation where a larger settlement might be on people's minds.
Many people are anticipating that Juul will receive an approved pre-market tobacco product application, or PMTA, from the FDA this fall, which would permit them to continue selling their products legally in the U.S. It is not outside the realm of possibility that Juul would be open to signing an MSA 2.0 to make this litigation go away and avoid RICO charges. If tobacco control activists were able to insert themselves into these negotiations, just like Matt Myers of the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids did with the original MSA, they may try to engineer a way to pay themselves. Tobacco control activists have already produced materials suggesting that the Truth Initiative is the organization that should receive a large portion of any settlement money, even though most of these lawsuits are still in the early stages. So what does the future of vaping look like? If there is an MSA 2.0 for vapor products, small businesses, if they could even afford to file a PMTA and are approved, will likely be shut out of the market unless they can also afford to sign on to the settlement. The PMTA process, coupled with an MSA 2.0, would skyrocket the price of whatever products legally remain on the market, offering an even larger incentive for a thriving underground market. Everyone involved in these lawsuits, and even those who aren't, seem to have their eyes on only one prize: money. There is no consideration of the fact that vapor products are helping people quit smoking, and that an MSA 2.0 would ultimately increase prices and restrict information about less harmful alternatives to smoking, hurting public health. The secret, hiding in plain sight, is that none of this is about public health. It's about feeding the tobacco control industrial complex.